This is Larry Jordan, the host of the Digital Production Buzz. The following interview is an excerpt from a recent program. To hear the entire program, visit digitalproductionbuzz.com. Garrett Savage is a documentary film editor whose work includes My Perestroika, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the Peabody Award, as well as HBO's How Democracy Works Now television series. There's a comma in there somewhere, and I'll figure it out in just a minute. He's also the co-founder and president of the Karen Schmeer Film Editing Fellowship. And Garrett, hello, welcome.
Hello, guys. How are you?
Good. We are doing just ducky in here.
Ducky?
What's
That's a Wisconsin word.
Well, were we not talking about Sesame Street?
Yes, I think so.
All right, so we had a duck in Sesame Street, and Garrett is from New York, and I wanted to try to use a New York colloquialism to make him feel at home.
Ducky fit right in.
I think
was listening to an interview with Dick Cavett was saying a few years ago how he's tired of awesome. He wants it, eliminated from the English language. So I think you found a nice replacement. I'll start saying ducky more often.
The world would be a better place if ducky was used more frequently. Garrett, what got you started as an editor?
What got me started as an editor? I went to school. I studied film at UC Santa Barbara and made some films, enjoyed the editing part of it. I moved to LA, and I really had no idea what area I wanted to go into. And just PA'd and tried to meet a bunch of people and was miserable as an office PA on a TV show. And the assistant editor said, "Why don't you come over here, take a look at what I'm doing?" And she brought me into this room, the dark room with the curtains drawn, with a coffee maker and a little refrigerator. And it was actually Lightworks. And it was this calm place, so different from being on set or in the production office. And there was the footage that they shot the day before. And I found that to be so exciting. And so Sandy Grubb was her name, and she helped lead me into the world of post-production. And that's what really got me involved professionally into it. And then I ended up, what did I do? I got lucky. My first job was cutting a friend's independent fiction feature film. And then from there, I got hired at a trailer company in Los Angeles and cut trailers, and then on and on from there. I moved to New York, and I got involved in commercials and was an assistant editor on that, and later documentaries and promos. I've cut promos for AMC and IFC and USA, and feature documentaries. So I've done worn a bunch of different hats in the editing world.
Do you have a preference of what you enjoy cutting?
I feel pretty lucky that I'm able to go back and forth between feature documentaries and promos is usually what I'm doing. It's a nice way for me to not get stuck in a rut and to exercise different muscles. Cutting promos takes a real specific set of skills and tools, and, you have to be quick, and you can't really worry about it too much and overthink it. You have a couple days to kind of put it all together and get it out the door. Meanwhile, when you're working on a documentary feature, of course, a lot more time is spent mulling it over and coming back the next day, and, it's a lot more thoughtful and a lot deeper. And so I like doing both of those things.
You say you got a couple of days to do a promo. Any tips for us in finding the story and how to do a promo in a couple of days?
Sure. Yeah, get a good producer and have them tell you what to do.
Good answer.
And but if you don't have that, I don't know. It really depends. It's
wait. Hold it. Stop a second. Back up.
Yeah.
You're cutting a promo of an existing show. Why is the producer important at all?
So the way it works in promos is, you've got the network. Let's say it's IFC, and they've got a show, and Portlandia, let's say, and they're trying to promote the show. So they sort of give an assignment to a producer who has to write a script, whether it be a voiceover. Maybe there's no words or no voiceover, but there could be title cards or a voiceover or something that says something witty or provides some kind of hook and contextualizes the footage that you're going to put in that 30-second promo. So they usually come up with that, and they may even select a piece of music because they, as a freelancer, sometimes I come in and I don't know what the network's current style of promo is. So usually the producers are the people who are keeping that consistent. So that's some of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. So basically the producer's acting as both the writer and the guide to make sure that you stay consistent with the other promos the network's creating.
Exactly. And so a lot of what they do is come up with the really, sometimes brilliant approaches to, pitching this program or this episode to the audience. And then as the editor, you come in and they probably don't know how to execute it, or they may have some ideas. But what I find exciting is to come in and have that intense collaboration where they're dependent on you to say, all right, here's what I want to do, help me make it happen. And of course, as the editor coming in, you got to remind yourself to not say no. That's not going to work. 'Cause that's right. That's often our first reaction is like, are you crazy? There's no way. And we only have 2 days. And how are you? So I have to keep that at bay and just say, yeah, all right, let's jump into this and make it happen.
Well, you mentioned...
And so I was joking, but it's true. If you have a great producer and somebody who's got a bunch of ideas, then that's great. And oftentimes as a freelancer, you establish a relationship with those people, and they call you back on, whatever network, if they're freelance, whatever network they're working for.
How
so
often?
That's kind of how you get hooked in.
How often do you come into a situation where you're doing a promo and you know nothing about the show? And how'd you get that gig?
Well, again, at a place like IFC, they have a bunch of different shows,
right.
And they have some staff editors, but then their staff editors are all booked, and then there's maybe there's a special that's coming up, or there's more material, more promos that need to be cut that they don't have the staff for, and so quite often you come in and you may just have to. It's a 30-minute show, right? So you could spend your first 45 minutes of work just watching that show and becoming familiar with that episode. And then and then lots of times they'll say, hey, check out these old promos we did to get an idea for the style and the flavor of it. And you guys mentioned crediting earlier when you were talking to Josh. A lot of times, more and more, I find myself in a crediting position where they say, here you go, make it happen. And those are definitely more stressful than when you don't have a producer.
Well, thinking of stress, there's two other things I want to talk with you about. But one thing, you're a freelance editor in New York. How do you manage to survive as a freelance editor? What are the challenges? It sounds like you're almost always in marketing mode, trying to find the next gig.
I think there's a period for me, my own personal experience. I think there's a period where I was, but what I find really encouraging about New York, and lots of times people say, oh, you're an editor, why are you in New York? Why didn't you go to L.A.? But I find there are so many content, there's so much content in New York that's just needing to be edited. But every week, every month, I find out about new places that I've never even heard of that are hiring freelance editors. So, I moved here in 1997, and so it's, I'm somebody who's been here a while. I don't know what it's like to talk to somebody who's younger or newer, but, after a while, you do a good job and you're personable, and, so much, as you guys know, so much of the part of your job is just how you are as a person and how you are in the room and how up for the job you are and up for the task at hand and just being a good person. And so after a while, you establish that reputation. The same people start working with you. And before you know it, you're in demand, because then people ask that, producers talk to each other and they say, well, who do you like? And I say, oh, call this guy or this woman and talk to them. So I don't know if it's lucky or good. It's probably a combination of both. But I think certainly in New York, there's so much work that if you prove yourself, you'll be in demand.
Yeah, that's what I always say is that, if you have a lot of talent, people will find you as long as you put yourself out there. Yeah.
Now, I will say, just since we're talking about promos quickly, people say to me all the time, well, that sounds great. How do I get into that? An established editor will say that, and I just sort of shake my head sometimes because, I feel like most promo editors are hired from within, and they start out as maybe a PA running tapes back and forth tapes, running whatever a PA does nowadays, and they just sort of work their way up. They're an assistant, or they're digitizing or organizing footage at night. Digitizing speaks to my age again, but and then they work their way up, and they get, oh, you know what? We're going to throw you a little 15-second promo. Why don't you cut that? You did a good job. So they work their way up. So promos, I think, is a pretty hard thing to break your way into if you haven't grown up in that system.
I want to change the subject. You co-founded a fellowship called the Karen Schmeer Film Editing Fellowship. Who's Karen Schmeer,
right.
And why did you found the fellowship?
I'm glad you asked. So Karen Schmeer was a film editor, a documentary editor, one of the best, I dare say, of her generation. She worked on many films with with Errol Morris. She cut Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. That was her first film back around 97, 98. And she's somebody who started in Errol's office and worked her way up pretty quickly to cut the film that he thought was uneditable, and she was the second editor on that and figured it out, and it went on to become a classic. And then from there, she worked on The Fog of War, which won the Academy Award. She worked on Mr. Death. She worked with Rob Moss on The Same River Twice. She cut 13 films, and 8 of them, I think, premiered at Sundance. And besides all those accomplishments, she was just an amazing person and really the best friend somebody could have. I met my wife at a dinner party that she hosted, and just a dear, wonderful person. And in 2010, in January, she was crossing the street on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and there was a police chase, and these guys were trying to get away from a silly drugstore robbery, and they were going high speed, and they hit her, and she died. And they ran away. They were ultimately caught and prosecuted. But so after she died, we were just listless and confused and sad and lost, and thought, let's do something positive with this. And Karen was always very supportive of younger editors, and always, often several examples of insisting on younger editors who may not on the surface show that they're ready for a job, but, telling a producer, like, you should really promote them and get them to cut your film. And so we thought the best thing we could do was start a film editing fellowship in her memory to carry on her legacy, and also to actively help and support emerging documentary film editors.
So, well, congratulations to you, because Karen, a lot of people still talk about Karen, and I've had conversations with Jenny McCormick about Karen over at Ace, and so thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Yeah.
So I can, I'll tell you more about it briefly. You can cut me off if I get too long-winded, but I just want to tell you kind of to sketch it out, and then we can tell people how they can apply and how they qualify.
Go ahead.
This is our 5th year. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Tell us.
Okay. Yeah, so this is our 5th year. We just awarded our 5th fellowship to excellent emerging editor named Anna Gustavi. She's the editor of Seymour and Introduction, a film that Ethan Hawke directed. It's still playing in theaters. It's a wonderful film. It's her first feature editing job. And so she's going to get a range of benefits. She gets a class at Manhattan Edit Workshop, thanks to Josh and those guys. They're one of our biggest partners. And she gets special membership at ACE, as you mentioned, Jenny McCormick. They're a huge partner of ours. She gets tickets to South by Southwest. We present the award to the fellow at South by Southwest at their award ceremony. She gets $1,000. She gets passes to other film festivals. And the most important thing we find is she gets mentorship. We set her up this year with three veteran mentors, documentary editors, Bob Eisenhart, Toby Shimon, and Matthew Hamachek. And she's already established relationships with them and can consult with them throughout the year, and they'll bring her into the edit room and show her rough cuts. And that's just, one of the best things that our fellows get. And
wow.
Yeah, it's great. And we have a new partnership with the Sundance Film Festival, So the fellow gets to go to Sundance. And this year, our organization partnered with Sundance at the festival, and we presented the first ever editors brunch during the festival about the art of editing. You know, they've had brunches for years for producers and directors, but never for editors. So we got about 150 editors in the room together. Joe Beanie, Werner Herzog's editor, gave a fantastic keynote address that's available online that I highly recommend people seek out and find. Joe Beanie, Sundance Editors Brunch will probably get you there if you Google that.
Garrett, before we do run out of time, where can people go that would like to apply for this fellowship?
They can go to KarenSchmeer.com. Karen Schmeer, SCHMEER.com. And I'll just tell you real briefly, the basic requirements are you need to have cut between 1 and 3 feature documentaries and be living in the United States during the year of your upcoming fellowship. I think those are the 2 main things.
That's very cool. Well, the other thing that you're doing that I want to touch on briefly is you're doing a workshop coming up at the Sight Sound Story workshop that Josh was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And your panel is on something that I'm very interested in, which is deconstructing a scene. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome.
Tell us, well, before you talk about the panel, tell us what deconstructing a scene is.
Okay. There's different ways to do it, right? We can simply show a scene, and the editor can talk about it, and we can talk about what went into it. I like to find scenes. I ask my panelists to find scenes that presented some big challenge during the editing of the film. I find that when I moderate panels, you know, if we cut right to the chase and cut to, you know, cutting anything is really hard, but cutting documentaries is really, really hard. And so I think it's beneficial for the audience to find out what was really hard about this movie that we're talking about. So what I like to do sometimes, and we may have this year, we're still figuring it out, but show a scene from a rough cut, maybe that was presented as a rough cut, and then they got feedback on it, and they figured out it was problematic, but they knew it had to be in the film. We'll show that, and then talk about it, talk about why it was a problem, talk about what went into solving those problems, and then show the final scene and show how it works. So we may be showing a scene from, it may be early to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say, we may be showing a scene from the Armstrong Lie.
Wow.
Edited by Andy Grieve. And when Alex Gibney was making that film, from what I understand, I don't totally know yet, but he was filming for years with Lance Armstrong and believing everything Lance Armstrong told him, and was making a film about it. And then once the fact that he was, you know, doping came out, that changed everything.
Yeah, well, that changed the entire film.
Yeah, and so, you know, much of the film was already cut. So they had to go back and change a lot of the film. And so we may be showing a scene before that news came out and then what the scene turned into.
Now, help me understand, why is deconstructing the scene so helpful when you're doing an edit?
When you're doing an edit, well, I would say as I might come at it as somebody, if you're an editor of documentary films, it's important to understand, to deconstruct the scene and deconstruct how the scene fit into the structure. You know, documentary films don't follow like the Robert McKee Hollywood or any kind of Hollywood beginning, middle, end structure. Usually, that's part of the excitement of documentaries. We can start anywhere and go anywhere, I find. So it's a huge puzzle, a huge mystery. And so to get in a room with these experts and these guys and women who are so versed in breaking down structure and figuring out ways of talking about it, I think is incredibly valuable. And it really doesn't happen very often.
Well, that's for sure. And also, it's like watching production with the sound turned off. You're suddenly paying much more attention to camera placement and actor blocking because you're outside the story and you're able to look at how they put it together and how they shot it. It'd be something similar.
It's really true. It's really true, even if our sound is up while we're watching the scene, just to isolate a scene and talk about what came before and what came after. I find myself all the time watching a great documentary. I just slip into it. And it's only when it's over or later when I'm talking about it, I really piece together how hard it was. And that's one thing I love talking about with editors is, well, that's not one thing, but I will say, you know, on a project, every documentary editor, if they admit it, which they usually do because they're cool people, they admit there was a long period where they had no idea what they were doing or where it was going. Yeah. And I love voicing that, right? Because if you hear that and if you're trying to be a great editor, and it's scary when you don't know. But to hear these veterans admit that too.
And Garrett,
how do you find the story?
Garrett, what website can people go who want to keep track of what you're doing?
The best thing is the KarenSchmeer.com website, I think. And,
okay, that's
and of
all.
Course, go to
All
go to the
one
Manhattan
word.
Edit Workshop website to find out about these panels.
Thank you. All one word, Karen Schmeer, KarenSchmeer, KarenSchmeer.com. Garrett, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Thanks, Garrett.
Take care. Bye-bye.